Hello, my friends. Welcome back. We're going to keep reading A Swiftly Tilting Planet by Madeleine L'Engle. So the last time that we read, we had heard about Madoc and his brother Gwydier from Wales and their fight, and Charles Wallace has been kind of tracing this connection between Wales and Vespugia, where Mad Dog Branzillo is. So we're going to pick back up with Chapter 6, The Lightning with its Rapid Wrath. Thanks, Meg, Charles Wallace whispered. Oh, Gwydier, she really did help us. She and the twins. He leaned forward to rest his cheek against the unicorn's neck. The book was by Matthew Maddox. I don't remember I ever read it, but I remember Dennis talking about it. And Mrs. O'Keefe was a Maddox, so she's got to be descended from Matthew. Descended, Gwydier snorted. You make it sound like a fall. If you look at Mrs. O'Keefe, that's what it's like, Charles Wallace admitted. 1865. Can we go there? Then, the unicorn corrected. When? We can try if you think it's important. We'll hope for a favorable wind. Charles Wallace looked alarmed. You mean we might get blown into another projection? It's always a risk. We know the Ectoroi are after us, to stop us, so you must hold on. I'll hold on for dear life. The last thing I want is to get blown into another projection. Gwydier blew softly through his teeth. I find our most recent information not very helpful. But it could be important. A group of Welshmen going to South America in 1865? I think we should try to go to Vespugia. That's a long way, and unicorns do not travel well to different wheres. And to try to move in both space and time? I don't like it, he flicked his tail. Then how about trying to move to 1865 right here, the year Matthew Maddox published his first novel? Then we could try to move from 1865 here to 1865 in Vespugia, and maybe we could learn something from Matthew Maddox. Very well. It's less dangerous to go elsewhen first than to try to go elsewhen and elsewhere simultaneously. He began to gallop, and as he flung himself onto a gust of wind, the wings lifted and they soared upward. The attack, just as they went through a shower of stars, was completely unexpected. A freezing gust blasted the wind on which they were riding, taking away Charles Wallace's breath. His knuckles whitened as he clenched the mane, which seemed to strengthen into steel wire to help him hold his grasp. He had a horrible sense of Gwydier battling with a darkness which was like an anti-unicorn, a flailing of negative wings and iron hooves. The silver mane was torn from his hands as he was assailed by the horrible stench which accompanied Ectoroi. Dark winds beat him from the unicorn's back, and he felt the burning cold of outer space. This was more horrible than any projection. His lungs cracked for lack of air. He would become a burnt-out body, a satellite circling forever the nearest sun. A powerful wrench, and air rushed into his battered lungs. He felt a sharp tug at the nape of his neck, and the blue anorak tightened against his throat. The agonizing stench was gone, and he was surrounded by the scent of unicorn breath, smelling of stars and frost. Gwydier was carrying him in his mouth, great ivory teeth clamped on the strong stuff of the anorak. Gwydier's iridescent wings beat against the dark. Charles Wallace held his breath. If Gwydier dropped him, the Ectoroi would be waiting. His armpits were cut from the pulling of the anorak, but he knew he must not struggle. Gwydier's breath gusted painfully from between clenched teeth. Then the silver hooves touched stone, and they were safely at the star-watching rock. Gwydier opened his teeth and dropped the boy. For the first moments, Charles Wallace was so weak, he collapsed onto the rock. Then he struggled to his feet, still trembling from the near disaster. He stretched his arms to ease the sore armpits and shoulders. Gwydier was breathing in great panting gusts, his flanks heaving. The soft breeze around them filled and healed their seared lungs. Gwydier rolled his lips and took a deep draught of clean air. Then he bent down and nuzzled Charles Wallace in the first gesture of affection he had shown. I wasn't sure we were going to get away. The Ectoroi are enraged that the wind managed to send you within Madoc, and they're trying to stop you from going within anyone else. Charles Wallace stroked the unicorn's muzzle. You saved me. I'd be tumbling in outer space forever if you hadn't grabbed my anorak. It was one chance in a million, Gwydier admitted, and the wind helped me. Charles Wallace reached up to put his arms around Gwydier's curving neck. Even with help, it wasn't easy. Thank you. Gwydier made a unicorn shrug. His curly beard quivered. Unicorns find it embarrassing to be thanked. Please desist. It was a hot midsummer's day, with thunderheads massed on the horizon. The lake was gone, and the familiar valley stretched to the hills. The woods were a forest of mighty elms and towering oaks and hemlock. In the far distance was what looked like a cluster of log cabins. I don't think this looks like 1865, he told Gwydier. You'd know more about that than I would. I didn't have much opportunity to learn Earth's history. I never expected this assignment. But Gwydier, we have to know when we are. Why? Charles Wallace tried to quell his impatience, which was all the sharper after the terror of the attack. If there's a might have been we're supposed to discover, we have to know when it is, don't we? Gaudior's own impatience was manifested by prancing. Why? We don't have to know everything. We have a charge laid on us, and we have to follow where it leads. You've been so busy trying to do the leading, we almost got taken by the ecthroi. Charles Wallace said nothing. Perhaps, Gaudior granted grudgingly, it wasn't entirely your fault. But I think we should not try to control the whens and the wheres, but should go where we're sent. And what with all the contretemps with the ecthroi, you're still in your own body, and you're supposed to be within. Oh, what should I do? Gaudior blew mightily through flared nostrils. I will have to ask the wind. And he raised his head and opened his jaws. Charles Wallace waited anxiously until the unicorn lowered his head and raised one wing, stretching it to its full span. Step close to me, he ordered. Charles Wallace moved under the wing and leaned against Gaudior's flank. Did the wind say when we are? You make too many demands, Gaudior chided, and folded his wing until Charles Wallace felt smothered. Gasping for breath, he tried to push his way out into the air, but the wing held him firmly, and at last his struggling ceased. When he opened his eyes, the day had vanished, and trees and rock were bathed in moonlight. He was within. Lying on the rock, looking up at the moon-bathed sky, only the most brilliant stars could compete with the silver light. Around him, the sounds of summer sang sweetly. A mourning dove complained from her place deep in the darkest shadows. A grandfather frog boomed his bull call. A pure trilling of birdsong made him sit up and call out in greeting. Zill! A young woman stepped out from the shadows of the forest. She was tall and slender, except for her belly, which was heavy with child. Thanks for meeting me, Brandon. Charles Wallace, within Brandon Llawcae, gave her a swift hug. Anything I do with you is fun, Zill. Again, as when he was within Harsels, he was younger than 15, perhaps 11 or 12, still very much a child, an eager, intelligent, loving child. In the moonlight, she smiled at him. The herbs I need to ease the birthing of my babe are found only when the moon is full, and only here. Richie fears it would offend Goody Adams, did she know? Goody, short for goodwife. That's what the Pilgrim said instead of Mrs. This. This was definitely not 1865 then. More than a century earlier, perhaps even 2 centuries. Brandon Llawcae must be the son of early settlers. Let yourself go, Gaudior knelled. Let yourself be Brandon. But why are we here? Charles Wallace demurred. What can we learn here? Stop asking questions. But I don't want to waste time, Charles Wallace said anxiously. Gaudior whickered irritably. You are here, and you are in Brandon. Let go. Let go. Be Brandon. Be. So, Zill continued, it is best that Richie not know either. I can always trust you, Brandon. You don't open your mouth and spill everything out when to do so would bring no good. Brandon ducked his head shyly, then looked swiftly up at Zill's eyes, which were a startling blue in her brown face. I've learned from the people of the wind that 'tis no harm to hold a secret in the heart. Zill sighed. No, it is no harm, but it grieves me that you and I may not share our gifts with those we love. My pictures, Brandon nodded. My parents want me to try not to see my pictures. Among my people, Zill said, you would be known as a seer, and you would be having the training in prayer and trusting that would keep your gift very close to the gods, from whom the gift comes. My father had hoped that Madoc might have the gift, because it is rare to have 2 with blue eyes in one generation. But my little brother's gift is to know about weather, when to plant and when to harvest, and that is a good gift, and a needed one. I miss Madoc. Bran scowled down at the rock. He never comes to the settlement anymore. Zill placed her hand lightly on his shoulder. It's different in the settlement now that there are more families. Madoc no longer feels welcome. I welcome him. He knows that, and he misses you too. But it isn't only that the settlement is larger. Madoc is older and has more work at home, but he will always be your friend. And I'll always be his. Always. Your pictures. Zill looked at him intensely. Are you able to stop seeing them? Not always. When I look at something that holds a reflection, sometimes the pictures come, whether I will or no, but I try not to ask them to come. When you see your pictures, it is all right to tell me what you see, the way you used to tell Madoc. Richie is afraid of them. She pressed his shoulder gently. Life has been nothing but hard work for Richie, with no time for seeing pictures or dreaming dreams. Your mother tells me that in Wales there are people who are gifted with the second sight, and that these people may be feared for their gift, but they are not frowned on. Richie says I would be frowned on. It is different here than in Wales, especially since Pastor Mortman came and built the church and scowled whenever Madoc visited the settlement, or I went to the Indian compound. Pastor Mortman would try to separate the white people from the Indians. But why? Brandon demanded. We were friends. And still are, Zill assured him. When did you last see a picture? Tonight, he told her. I saw the reflection of a candle on the side of the copper kettle Mother had just polished, and I saw a picture of here, this very place, but the rock was much higher, and there, he pointed to the valley, It was all a lake, with the sun sparkling on the water. She looked at him wonderingly. My father, Zillow, says the valley was once a lake bed. And I saw Maddock. At least, it wasn't Maddock because he was older and his skin was fair, but he looked so like Maddock. At first I thought he was. The legend, she murmured. Oh, Brandon, I feel we are very close, you and I. Perhaps it is having to keep our gifts hidden that brings us added closeness. While they were talking, she had been gathering a small plant that grew between the grasses. She held the blossoms out to the moonlight. I know where to find the healing herbs, herbs that will keep babies from choking to death in the winter, or from dying of the summer sickness when the weather is hot and heavy as it is now. But your mother warns me I must not offer these gifts. They would not be well received. But for myself, and the birthing of Richie's and my baby, I will not be without the herbs which will help me give a good birthing and a fine child. She began to spread the delicate blossoms on the rock. As the moonlight touched them, petals and leaf alike appeared to glow with inner silver. Zell looked up at the moon and sang, Lords of fire and earth and water, lords of moon and wind and sky, come now to the old man's daughter, come from fathers long gone by, bring blue from a distant eye. Lords of water, earth, and fire, lords of wind and snow and rain, give to me my heart's desire. Life, as all life, comes with pain, but blue will come to us again. Then she knelt and breathed in the fragrance of the blossoms, took them up in her hands and pressed them against her forehead, her lips, her breasts against the roundness of her belly. Brandon asked, Do we take the flowers home with us? I would not want Goody Adams to see them. When Richie and I were born, there wasn't a midwife in the settlement. Goody Adams is a fine midwife, Zell assured him. Had she been here, your mother might not have lost those little ones between you and Richie, but she would not approve of what I have just done. We will leave the birthing flowers here for the birds and the moon and the wind. They've already given me their help. When? Oh, Zell, do you know when the baby will come? Tomorrow, she stood. It's time we went home. I would not want Richie to wake and find me not beside him. Brandon reached for her long, cool fingers. It was the best day in the world when Richie married you. She smiled swiftly, concealing a shadow of worry in her eyes. The people of the settlement looked with suspicion on an Indian in their midst, and a blue-eyed Indian at that. If they'd only listened to our story that comes from Wales and to your story, she pressed his fingers. Richie warns me not to talk about our legend of the white man who came to us in the days when there were only Indians on this continent. Long ago? Long, long ago. He came from across the sea, from a land at the other end of the world, and he was a brave man and true, who lusted neither after power nor after land. My little brother is named after him. And the song? Brandon asked. It's old, very old. The prayer for a blue-eyed baby to keep the strength of the prince from over the sea within the wind people. The words may have changed over the years, and I have changed, for I have made my life with the white people, as the golden prince made his with the wind people. For love, he stayed with the princess of a strange land and made her ways his ways. For love, I leave my people and stay with Richie, and my love is deep, deep for me to be able to leave my home. I sing the prayer because it is in my blood and must be sung, and yet I wonder if my child would be allowed to know the Indian half of himself. He? It will be a boy. How do you know? The trees have told me in the turning of their leaves under the moonlight. I would like a girl baby, but Richie will be pleased to have a son. The footpath through the grasses led them to a brook, which caught the light of the moon and glimmered in the shifting shadows of the leaves. The brook was spanned by a natural stone bridge, and here Zell paused, looking down at the water. Brandon, too, looked at their reflections, shifting and shimmering as the wind stirred the leaves. While he looked at Zell's reflection, the water stirring her mouth into a tender smile, he saw, too, a baby held close in her arms, a black-haired, blue-eyed baby with gold behind its eyes. Then, while he gazed, the eyes changed in the child and turned sullen, and the face was no longer the face of a baby, but the face of a man, and he could not see Zell anywhere. The man wore a strange-looking uniform with many medals, and his jowls were dark, jutting pridefully. He was thinking to himself, and he was thinking cruel thoughts, vindictive thoughts, and then Brandon saw fire, raging fire. His body gave a mighty shudder, and he gasped and turned toward Zell, then glanced fearfully at the brook. The fire was gone, and only their two faces were reflected. She asked, "What did you see?" Eyes lowered, gazing at the dark stone of the bridge, he told her, trying not to let the images reappear in his mind's eye. She shook her head somberly. "I make nothing out of it. Certainly nothing good." Still looking down, Brandon said, "Before I was made to feel afraid of my pictures, they were never frightening, only beautiful." Zell squeezed his hand reassuringly. "I'd like to tell my father about this one, for he is trained in the interpretation of visions." Brandon hesitated, then, "All right, if you want to." "I want him to give me comfort," she said in a low voice. They turned from the brook and walked on home in silence, to the dusty clearing with its cluster of log cabins. The Llawcae's cabin was the first, a sizable building with a central room for sitting and eating and a bedroom at either end. Brandon's room was a shed added to his parents' room and was barely large enough to hold a small bed, a chest, and a chair. But it was all his. And Richie had promised that after the baby was born, he would cut a fine window in the wall, as people were beginning to do now that the settlement was established. Brandon's cubbyhole was dark, but he was used to his own room's night, and moved in it as securely as though he had lit a candle. Without undressing, he lay down on the bed. In the distance, the thunder growled, and with the thunder came an echo, a low, rhythmic rumbling, which Brandon recognized as the drums of the wind people as they sang their prayers for rain. In the morning, when he wakened, he heard bustling in the central room, and went in to find his mother boiling water in the big black kettle suspended from a large hook in the fireplace. Goody Adams, the midwife, was bustling about, exuding importance. "This is a first birth," she said. "We'll need many kettles of water for the Indian girl." "Zill is our daughter," Brandon's mother reminded the midwife. "Once an Indian, always an Indian, Goody Llawcae. Not forgetting we're all grateful for her presence among us, causes us to live in peace with the savage heathen." "They're not," Brandon started fiercely, but his mother said, "The chores are waiting, Brandon." Biting his lip, he went out. The morning was clear, with a small mist drifting across the ground and hazing the outline of the hills. When the sun was full, the mist would go. The settlers were grateful for the mist and the heavy dews, which were all that kept the crops from drying up and withering completely, for there had been no rain for more than a moon. Brandon went to the small barn behind the cabin to let their cow out into the daylight. She would graze with the other cattle all day, and at dusk Brandon would ride out on his pony to bring her home for milking. He gave the pony some oats, then fed the horse. In the distance he could hear hammering. Goodman Llawcae and his son Richie were the finest carpenters for many miles around, and were always busy with orders. I'm glad Richie didn't hear Goody Adams call Zill's people savage heathens, he thought. It's a good thing he was in with Zill. Then he started back to the house. The picture he had seen in the brook the night before troubled him. He was afraid of the dark man with cruel thoughts, and he was afraid of the fire. Since he had tried to repress the pictures, they had become more and more frightening. When he reached the cabin and went in through the door, which was propped open to allow all the fresh air possible to enter, his mother came out of the bedroom and spoke to Richie, who was pacing up and down in front of the fireplace. "Your father needs you, Richie. Zell is resting now, between pains. I will call you at once should she need you." Goody Adams muttered. "The Indian girl does not cry. It is an omen." Richie flung back his head. "It is the mark of the Indian, Goody. Zell will shed no tears in front of you." "Heathen," Goody Adams started, but Goody Llawcae cut her short. "Richie, Brandon, go to your father." Richie flung out the door, not deigning to look at the midwife. Brandon followed him, calling, "Richie!" Richie paused, but did not turn around. "I hate Goody Adams!" Brandon exploded. Now Richie looked at his young brother. Hate never did any good. Everyone in the settlement feels the lash of Goody Adams' tongue, but her hands bring out living babies, and there's been no childbed fever since she's been here. I liked it better when I was little. There was only us Llawcaes and the Higginses, and Davy and I used to play with Maddock. It was simpler then, Richie agreed, but change is the way of the world. Is change always good? Richie shook his head. There was more joy when there were just the two families of us, and no Pastor Mortman to put his dead hand on our songs and stories. I cannot find it in me to believe that God enjoys long faces and scowls at merriment. Get along with you now, Bram. I have work to do, and so do you. When Brandon finished his chores and hurried back to the cabin, walking silently, one foot directly in front of the other, as Maddock had taught him, Richie, too, had returned and was standing in the doorway. The sun was high in the sky and beat fiercely on the cabins and the dusty compound. The grass was turning brown, and the green leaves had lost their sheen. Richie shook his head. Not yet. It's fiercely hot. Look at those thunderheads. They've been there every day. Brandon looked at the heavy clouds massed on the horizon, and not a drop of rain. A low, nearly inaudible moan came from the cabin, and Richie hurried indoors. From the bedroom came a sharp cry, and Brandon's skin prickled with gooseflesh, despite the heat. Oh, God, make Zell be all right. He focused on one small cloud in the dry blue, and there he saw a picture of Zell and the black-haired, blue-eyed baby. And as he watched, both mother and child changed, and the mother was still black-haired, but creamy of skin, and the baby was bronze-skinned and blue-eyed, and the joy in his face of the mother was the same as in the picture of Zell. But the fair-skinned mother was not in the familiar landscape, but in a wild, hot country, and her clothes were not like the homespun or leather he was accustomed to, but different, finer than clothes he had seen before. The baby began to cry, but the cry came not from the baby in the picture, but from the cabin, a real cry, the healthy squall of an infant. Goody Llawcae came to the door, her face alight. It's a nephew you have, Brandon, a bonny boy, and Zell beaming like the sun. Though sorrow endure for a night, joy cometh in the morning. It's afternoon. Don't be so literal, lad. Run to let your father know. Now. But when may I see Zell and the baby? After his grandfather has had the privilege. Run. When Goody Adams had at last taken herself off, the Llawcaes gathered around the mother and child. Zell laid on the big carved bed, which Richard Llawcae had made for her and Richie as a wedding present. Light from the door to the kitchen living room fell across her as she held the newborn child in her arms. Its eyes were tightly closed, and it waved tiny fists in searching gestures, and its little mouth opened and closed as though it were sipping its strange new element, air. "Oh, taste and see," Zell murmured, and touched her lips softly to the dark fuzz on the baby's head. His copper skin was still moist from the effort of birth and the humidity of the day. In the distance, thunder growled. "His eyes?" Brandon whispered. "Blue. Goody Adams says the color of the eyes often changes, but Brand's won't. No baby could ask for a better uncle. Maybe name him after you." Brandon nodded, blushing with pleasure, and reached out with one finger to touch the baby's cheek. Richard Llawcae opened the big, much-used Bible and read aloud. "I love the Lord, because he hath heard my voice and my supplications. The sorrows of death compassed me, and the pains of hell got hold on me. I found trouble and sorrow, then I called upon the name of the Lord. Gracious is the Lord, and righteous. I was brought low, and he helped me. Return unto thy rest, O my soul, for the Lord hath dealt bountifully with thee." "Amen," Zell said. Richard Llawcae closed the book. "You are my beloved daughter, Zell. When Richie chose you for his betrothed, his mother and I were uncertain at first, as were your own people. But it seemed to your father Zillow and me that two legends were coming together in this union, and time has taught us that it was a blessed inevitability. Thank you, Father." She reached out to his leathery hand. "Goody Adams did not like it that I shed no tears." Goody Llawcae ran her hand gently over Zell's shining black hair. "She knows that it is the way of your people." Savages. Heathen savages, Brandon thought. That's what Goody Adams thinks of Zell's people. When Bran went to do his evening chores, a shadow materialized from behind the great trunk of a pine tree. Maddock. Brandon greeted him with joy. "I'm glad to see you. Father was going to send me to the Indian compound after chores, but now I can tell you, the baby's come, a boy, and all is well." The shadow of a smile moved across Maddock's face, in which the blue eyes were as startling as they were in Zell. "My father will be glad. Your family will allow us to come tonight to see the baby?" "Of course." Maddock's eyes clouded. "It's not of course. Not anymore." "It is with us Llawcaes. Maddock, how did you know to come just now?" "I saw Zell yesterday. She told me it would be today." "I didn't see you." "You weren't alone. Davy Higgins was with you." "But you and Davy and I always played together. It was the three of us." "Not anymore. Davy has been forbidden to leave the settlement and come to the compound. Your medicine man's gods do not respect our gods." Brandon let out his breath in a sigh that was nearly a groan. "Pastor Mortman, it's not our gods that don't respect your gods. It's Pastor Mortman." Maddock nodded. "And his son is courting Davy's sister." Brandon giggled. "I'd love to see Pastor Mortman's face if he heard himself referred to as a medicine man." "He is not a good medicine man," Maddock said. "He will cause trouble." "He already has. It's his fault Davy can't see you." Maddock looked intently into Brandon's eyes. "My father also sent me to warn you." "Warn? Of what?" "We have had runners out. In the town there is much talk of witchcraft." Witchcraft. It was an ugly word. "But not here," Brandon said. "Not yet, but there is talk among your people." "What kind of talk?" Brandon asked sharply. "My sister shed no tears during the birth." "They know it is the way of the Indian." "It is also the mark of a witch. They say a cat ran screaming through the street at the time of the birth, and Zell put her pain into the cat." "That is nonsense," but Brandon's eyes were troubled. "My father says there are evil spirits abroad, hardening men's hearts. He says there is lust to see evil and innocence. Brandon, my friend and brother, take care of Zell and the baby." "Zell and I picked herbs for the birthing," Brandon said in a low voice. "Zell was taught all the ways of a good delivery, and she has the healing gifts, but that too would be looked upon as magic, black magic." "But it's not magic." "No, it is understanding the healing qualities of certain plants and roots. People are afraid of knowledge that is not yet theirs. My father is concerned for Zell and for you." Brandon protested. "But we are known as God-loving people. Surely they couldn't think." "Because you are known as such, they will wish to think," Maddock said. "My father says you should go more with the other children of the settlement, where you can see and hear. It's better to be prepared. I, too, will keep my ears open." Without saying goodbye, he disappeared into the forest. Late in the evening, when most of the settlement was sleeping, Zell's people came through the woods, silently, in single file, approaching the cabin from behind, as Maddock had done in the afternoon. They clustered around Zell and the baby and were served Goody Llawcae's special cold herb tea and freshly baked bread, fragrant with golden cheese and sweet butter. Zillow took his grandson into his arms, and a shadow of tenderness moved across his impassive face. "Brandon, son of Zell of the Wind People, and son of Richie Llawcae, son of a prince from the distant land of Wales. Brandon, bearer of the blue, he murmured over the sleeping baby, rocking him gently in his arms. Out of the corner of his eye, Brandon saw one of the Indian women go to his mother, talking to her softly. His mother put her hand on her head in a worried gesture, and before the Indians left, he saw Zillow take his father aside. So that is not the end of chapter 6, but it is where we're going to stop for today because I think it's been like 25 minutes or something. This is a really long chapter, so we're going to finish it up tomorrow, all right? So it seems like things are not going to be great for the Llawcaes and for Zill and the new baby. So we shall see what happens next. I'll see you guys tomorrow.